Following on from the video which explained the multiplier effect and the fact that you increase injections, which leads to an increase in expenditure, which leads to an increase in income, which leads to an increase in consumption and withdrawals, and that consumption then gets passed around as secondary increase in expenditure. Okay, so that was the analysis from the first video. If you haven't watched that, I'd suggest that you watch that one before we go on to this one. So basically what's happening, if you think about it, is that the initial increase in the injections gets multiplied up. And so you get this idea of a multiplier effect and a multiplier value. Now, you do not need to know the mechanics behind this and how you work out the multiplier equations, but simply to say that there is a difference between the value of the multiplier, that's just a number, okay, that's just like a number like 2 or 3, and the multiplier effect. Okay, so try and distinguish between those two. The value of the multiplier, which we call in economics K, is equal to 1 divided by the marginal propensity to withdraw. So hopefully in your notes you understand marginal propensity to withdraw. It's simply out of your extra income how much you decide to withdraw from the economy, i.e. save, tax and spend on imports. So the marginal propensity to withdraw is made up of the marginal propensity to save, the marginal propensity to tax and the marginal propensity to import. Okay, so basically what that is the change in the withdrawals over the change in your income. That's always going to be a number less than 1. So this number is going to be less than 1. So the multiplier is 1 over something that's less than 1. So this is always going to be greater than 1. And obviously, the bigger the denominator here, the MPW, the bigger that is, then the smaller the value of the multiplier. That's logical as well if you think about it. If we get a big increase in our incomes and we save it all, we don't pass any on, so MPW is very, very high, for example, then obviously the multiplier value is not going to be very high. Now, given that you can also do only two things with an increase in income, you can consume it or you can withdraw it, the next multiplier value is 1 over 1 minus MPC. So if we are withdrawing 0.4, we must be consuming 0.6. So those two numbers add up to 1. So MPW is also 1 minus MPC. Okay, now the multiplier effect is that this value of K that you work out over here is given to you by the initial change in injections multiplied up by whatever that number is to give you a final change in real GDP. In other words, if K was 4, so MPW was 0.25 or a quarter, okay? If K is 4, it multiplies up by 4, so a £10 million increase in injections leads to a £40 million increase in real GDP, and that's the multiplier effect. So the value is given here, but the effect is given over here, okay? So these two things are equal. So K is 1 over MPW equals final change in real GDP, initial change in injections. So what you do is you combine those equations. So in other words, the value of this multiplier, a number, 1 over MPW, sometimes you'll be asked to work that out, equals the final change in real GDP divided by the initial change in injections. So it's important that you're able to see that link between those two things. Now, you might in the exam, in multiple choice work, be told two of these values. So you've got MPW, change in real GDP, initial change in injections. You might be told two of those, and then you've got to work out the third one. That tends to be what the examiner does. So let me give you an example. If MPW is 0.2 and there is an increase in injections of 5 billion, what is the change in real GDP? Well, the first thing you work out, because you're told the MPW and you're told injections and you're trying to find this one out, the first thing you work out is the value of the multiplier. So if MPW is 0.2, 1 over 0.2 gives me an answer of 5. So the multiplier value is 5. What does that mean? It means that for any increase in injections of 5 billion, they get multiplied up by 5. So the final change in real GDP is 5 times 5, being the multiplier value, times the change in injections gives me 25 billion. So the change in real GDP is 25 billion. Sometimes the examiner gets nasty, and what they do is they give you the old GDP and they say, what's the new GDP? So you take the old and you just add 25 billion to it. It's another way they can ask these questions. Okay, if the MPW is 0.2, still working on that, and it says real GDP now rose by 10. So they've given you this, and the top of that question will be, what was the change in J? So again, we work out the value of the multiplier is 5. So you put a 5 in here. What's the change in J? J is this 10 divided by what number? What number, when you divide it into 10, gives you an answer of 5. And obviously the change in J is 2. Another question which can be asked is, if real GDP rises by 6, injections rise by 3, what is the MPW? Or MPC. And so you would say the multiplier is 6 over 3, 2. Okay. Sometimes people get marks knocked off here because you're dividing 6 billion by 3 billion and they put 2 and then they put in billions of pounds. It is only a number, so try and remember that. So if K is 2, 1 over what is MPW? MPW must be 0.5 or a half. As I say, they can sometimes ask you what is MPC, so it's 1 minus the MPW, same as in this case of a half. So here's a question that was asked in an AQA paper. It's been estimated that the MPC is 0.8. So as soon as you see that, you think if MPC is 0.8, MPW must be 0.2. The question is, after a $2 billion increase in $2 billion increase in investment, which of the following shows the increase in GDP? So ceteris paribus, all other things being equal, if MPW is 0.2, that gives you the value of the multiplier to be 5. If there's been an increase in 2 billion in J, that means there was an increase in real GDP of 10 billion. Last question, the size of the country's multiplier is 2.5. So we know K is 2.5, and then it just says here's the marginal rate of tax, savings and imports. So we know that if that country multiplier was 2.5, 1 divided by what gives me an answer of 2.5, and the answer is 0.4. Okay. However, 0.4 is the MPW, so be careful here. So 1 divided by 0.4 gives me an answer of 2.5, but I know that the MPW is made up of those 3 withdrawals. So if taxes are 0.1, savings is 0.1, and I've got to make that up to 0.4, I need to find this answer here, which is 0.2. Okay, so the answer was B, 0.2. Add 0.2 to 0.1 and 0.1, and I get 0.4, and I know that that's the MPW. So again, hopefully that's helpful when it comes to these odd little questions about the value of the multiplier and how you work out the increase in real GDP or injections or MPW by just looking at those 2 equations. Really important that you know there's 2 equations.